If you've been working on your CASPer prep, you're probably really familiar with probably the most common type of CASPer question, the scenario-based question, where you're given a hypothetical situation and asked, what would you do? Today, though, I want to talk about a somewhat less common but still very frequently encountered CASPer question type, and that's the quote-based question. To do this, I'll give you a quote and we'll work through it with an eye to some of the things that CASPer evaluators are looking for. Before I get into that, hi, my name is Dr. Sarah Klebe and I'm an admissions expert at BeMo. And if you'd like our help preparing for your CASPer test, simply go to BeMoCASPer.com and we'll get you started on your preparations by putting you in contact with one of our admissions experts. Now, let's take a look at that quote-based CASPer question. So, the quote question. Before I get into the actual quotation that we'll be discussing today, there's a few things that I want to just sort of lay down and establish as foundational. So, one of the things that really trips people up about quote-based questions is thinking that they need to be familiar with the quote itself. They need to be deeply familiar with whomever said the quote. Or that they need to know what the quote means to the person who said it, that they need to know what it means in context. And if that is your expectation and you get a quote and you have no idea who the person is, or you've never heard those words before, that can really trip you up and make you freeze. And in CASPer, the time is ticking down. You cannot afford to freeze. So let me make this absolutely clear before we get started. I'm going to be talking about a quote that you might have heard, probably not. It's not a super common one, but from a person who's very well known. But even if you had no idea who this person was, you'd never heard the quote, you couldn't say what it meant in context, that's okay. You haven't read or heard everything that has ever been written or spoken. You have not heard of every person who has ever existed. There can absolutely be gaps in your knowledge, and you can still do well on these kinds of questions. It is not at all about figuring out if you have read some obscure text or if you can process some complex theory and context or anything like that. That's not the point. Remember, CASPer is a situational judgment test. They want to figure out who you are at your core, what your values are, what your priorities are, what your ethical boundaries are, what your understanding of professional best practices is from your perspective as someone who is still an aspiring professional. They do not expect you to be a professor. They do not expect you to be a scholar. They don't expect you to be a doctor or a lawyer or a pharmacist or a veterinarian or any of the other things for which CASPer is used. They are looking for common traits, characteristics, and aspects of your personality that are a good fit for the profession. They're looking for your communication skills, for your ability to respond to ethical quandaries or ethically tense situations, to resolve conflict, to collaborate with others, what resources you try to look into or access if you're not sure which action to take. Those are the kinds of things that they are trying to understand about you. This is not a test of your pre-existing knowledge. It is one way for them to simply understand who you are and whether it seems like you have the key qualities and core competencies necessary to thrive in the field you are pursuing. So, sorry if I keep scratching. I have a cat hair that is stuck somewhere up here and it's just itching me like crazy. So excuse me for that. All right, back to the question. So here's the quote. First, it's a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the great civil rights leader from the United States in the civil rights era, the 1960s in particular. This is not his most common quote, but it's one that's really fascinating and one that I think works really well for this exercise, because we're going to walk through how we can break down a quote that is kind of complex. There's kind of a lot going on here, but you don't necessarily have to know exactly what King meant to work through this. So here's the quote itself. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Let me read it again. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So, 3 sentences that we can sort of break down to try to figure out what we want to say about this. The question that would follow this would be something like, what does this quotation mean to you? So it wouldn't be, what did Dr. King mean by this? Though I think we can intuit that. We can pull this apart a little bit, think about what we know about this figure and his philosophy, and put together a reasonable answer. But they want to know what it means to you. So what ideas does this spark in you? What associations can you make? So there's also some terminology that might be unfamiliar to some people, in particular the idea of an inescapable network of mutuality. Mutuality is, for some, sort of more advanced vocabulary, but it's just based on the word mutual. So something that is common, something that is shared. So this single garment of destiny that he says we're woven into or tied into, that we are in this network of shared experience. So let's start with the first sentence. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So first off, again, what do we know about Dr. King? Well, we know that he was a great civil rights leader. We know that he was trying to draw attention to the prevalence of injustice. Racial injustice, economic injustice, the variety of issues that were at the core of that civil rights movement. So, saying that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, he's taking something that is potentially singular, right? One act of injustice threatens the entirety of justice itself. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So this idea that a single injustice is not in and of itself singular. It may happen in one occasion, at one point, at one moment in time, at one specific place. But for him, that's part of something bigger, that structure of justice that is destabilized or fractured by that single act of injustice. So those individual actions of bigotry, hatred, racism, things like that, that he fought so vigilantly against, are profoundly social. They're not individual. They're not personal. They're larger than that. The individual affects the social. Second sentence, which is really building on that. All men, or all people, are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. So, inescapable network of mutuality. Inescapable. We can't get out of this. He's describing something that we are all part of, whether we like it or not. In sort of philosophical terms, they would say we are always already in this network of mutuality. We can't not be part of this. Network, again, speaks to something that kind of connects us all, something that overarches us as individuals and pulls us all together. And that sense of mutuality, that sense of a shared experience. So we're all stuck, again, whether we like it or not, in this situation where we are dependent on one another, where we are connected to one another. We share this social world regardless of our personal sort of opinion about it. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And then the second part of the sentence, tied in a single garment of destiny. So first he's using metaphor, referring to a garment, a sort of textile, which of course is something that is woven fabric, right? We are all these threads tied together, making up this network of mutuality that he then refers to as the garment of destiny. So let's unpack this a little bit more. And again, think about what we know about Martin Luther King. We know not only that he was a civil rights leader, he was also a reverend, right? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So he was a religious person, a religious leader, and also a political and activist leader. So this idea of destiny for him is going to be bound up with his activism, but also his religiosity. Right? He spoke a lot in his sermons, obviously, but also in his more public speeches about this idea of his conception of the divine that is loving, that is bent towards justice, that wants equality and fairness and liberation from oppression for all people. So that idea of a garment of destiny, for him, he's talking about something that is part of a larger scheme, something that goes beyond simply the worldly and into the sort of spiritual. Again, we don't have to necessarily talk about our own, religious beliefs or lack thereof or anything like that. We're simply thinking about what we know about this person and therefore what we can intuit from this quote so that we can demonstrate our thought processes. So he's talking about this intense mutuality of what is essentially the human condition. When we are living in a situation of injustice, we are experiencing, for King, our own experience of injustice, but one that is, again, part of that larger social network, but also that larger sort of metaphysical or spiritual network for him. So harming any one person in that structure through injustice, through bigotry, through racism, etc., harms the entire structure itself, harms the entire social structure, but also for King harms the whole divine structure for him. So this is a threat that goes beyond the everyday individual experiences of people who experience racist bigotry, economic deprivation, etc., etc. And when individuals themselves act out of hatred, bigotry, racism, etc., they fracture that mutuality. They cut themselves out of that single garment of destiny that for King is arced toward the sense of justice and equality for all. So when we engage in oppressive acts, we're harming the individuals who are the subject of those, are the object of those actions. We're harming that larger network of mutuality, that social or metaphysical world, but we're also harming ourselves. Because that mutuality is so intense for him, it's part of that lived experience. It is what our social world is, and by cutting ourselves off from that, We fracture something that's important. We fracture those bonds that, civilization, society itself is sort of built on. And for him, we cut ourselves out of that sort of manifestation of divine love. So when we express hatred, when we harm others, we become these sort of toxic vessels, right? We start spreading this, poison of hatred and bigotry that kind of leaches out into the waters of life itself, destabilizing the foundation of that society. And then let's come back to the third sentence. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. He's repeating himself. He's, essentially each of these three sentences says the same thing, just a little bit differently. And that, again, when we think about King, who was a political leader, an activist leader, a religious leader, someone who was looked up to by any number of people from any number of different perspectives, he's articulating the same idea in multiple ways so that it can be understood by people who are approaching that from different perspectives. He's seeking sort of touchstones for all different sorts of people, finding something that will resonate in the same ways for people with different beliefs, different convictions, different life experiences, etc. And again, that speaks to his work, attempting to help all people understand the ways in which we can be complicit in oppressive structures, ways in which we can act in liberatory ways for ourselves and others within those structures, while also stepping back and realizing that we're all part of that structure. There's no real opting out, according to his perspective. So, obviously, I've spent quite a bit of time just sort of walking you through this, and you don't have that kind of time in CASPer, right? So this is one reason why it is important to do practice questions ahead of time, to expose yourself to a wide variety of ideas, and to sort of read widely, to just engage different kinds of ideas, because the more you do it, the more automatic it becomes. It would be quite easy for me to sit down and really quickly in 5 minutes jot down a couple of paragraphs that really just succinctly convey what I've just kind of really carefully drawn out and teased out for you. And, ultimately, King may have meant something completely different. I'm not reading this quote in context. I don't know what he said right before or right after. I'm drawing on my particular knowledge of this individual, but I could also be wrong about the meaning that I'm intuiting from these three isolated sentences. But that's not the point. The point is to see what you do with ideas when they're just kind of thrown at you like that, especially ideas that you may not be familiar with. And you don't need an encyclopedic knowledge to be able to do that. I have personally, studied this individual in other contexts, but I've tried in my explanation to really stick to things that are well known in the general public memory of Dr. King. We could certainly go much deeper with all of these statements, but there's no need to do that. Simply by thinking about who the person is, what his perspectives were, what his values were, what his public role was, we can weave together something that sounds pretty good. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to be okay. You don't need to know exactly what he was saying. You don't need to know it in context. You simply need to demonstrate your thought processes. And if they can see you working through that and articulating something that seems reasonable, that is well thought out, that is logical, that builds off of the foundation given to you by the quote, then you're demonstrating good communication skills. You're demonstrating your adaptability in the moment, being given this, set of words that you've probably never seen before and coming up with something sensible off of it. If you do happen to have knowledge of the quote or the individual being quoted, you can demonstrate some of that if you want, but only to the end of demonstrating those qualities about yourself. This isn't the time to try to write a 5-minute thesis and show off your vast knowledge of the individual. That can certainly inform where you go with your answer, but how you articulate that answer and how you sort of demonstrate your reasoning, that's what's most important. So if you get thrown a quote and you've never seen it before in your life, don't panic. The best way to prepare for these quotes is to simply prepare for these kinds of questions. Familiarize yourself with them, look up these kinds of sample questions, expert responses, start thinking about the associations that you would make, but start off by taking it slowly, just like we did there, one sentence or sometimes even one portion of a sentence or one word at a time. Make associations, and the more you do that, the easier it becomes. You never know what questions you're going to get in the actual CASPer test, but you can absolutely prepare for the different types of questions. And taking it slowly, piece by piece, and working through your associations is the best way to take apart a quote-based question like this. So, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. If so, please do go ahead, like it, share it with a friend who might benefit from it. Be sure to follow us on whatever social media you're on right now. If you'd like us to help you with your CASPer prep, you can simply go to BeMoCASPer.com or follow the link that should appear either above or below this video to see our programs and schedule a free initial consultation. We'll set you up with one of our admissions experts to answer any questions you might have and get you started with your preparations. We have programs to suit any of your needs, and we're always happy to work with you to determine which plan is going to support you and your goals most effectively. As ever, thank you so very much for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.